6 of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. Today, we'll be continuing on with our previous study, which is a study of human rights in repressive states. I'll provide everyone a quick reminder to all those present here to please follow the recommendations of the public health authorities as well as the directives of the Board of Internal Economy to remain healthy and safe. As for everyone who's joining us virtually, you should know that the translation function can be found at the bottom of your screens where the global icon is. Now, we're truly honored today to welcome a stellar lineup of panelists. Our first three panelists...
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, just on a point of order before you begin, I just wanted to advise the committee and the witnesses that I'm not feeling well. I am well enough to be at the meeting isolated due to being tested positive for COVID on Saturday. However, I am probably going to be turning my camera off during the meeting. I wanted the witnesses to know this because I will be listening. I'm going to be taking notes, but I don't want it to be seen as any disrespect if my camera is off because I find myself I go a little while and then I have to wrap myself up like a burrito and lie on the couch. So even if I'm wrapped up like a burrito, I am going to be listening intensely to really important witnesses that I care a lot about. So that just want to let you know, I put a tie on just to be able to say that.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. Now, if we can return to introducing our stellar panelists for today. First, we have a panel of three, and this particular panel will be comprised of three experts. Our first one is Nobel laureate Maria Ressa, who is well known to you all. She is currently the Chief Executive Officer and President of Rappler. Then we have Ms. Nazanin Boniadi, renowned actress and ambassador for Amnesty International, United Kingdom. And lastly, we have Mr. Matthew Leung, former reporter with Ming Pao Daily of Hong Kong. Terribly sorry about all the technical challenges there, Mr. Leung. Now, for each of the panelists, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And approximately 30 seconds before you reach that, I will put up a sign, but obviously if you go a few seconds over, that's perfectly fine. After you do your opening remarks, then the members will be asking you questions. Now, if I could start with Ms. Ressa, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today. I'd like to share 3 points. First, what we're living through in the Philippines as journalists and human rights defenders. Second, how technology for profit has become an insidious tool for tyranny globally. And finally, what we're doing to help safeguard our elections, which is happening in exactly 42 days in the Philippines right now. It's 41 days. They're just waking up. So I've called this an Avengers Assemble moment in our nation's battle for facts. I've been a journalist for more than 36 years. It is in 2016, we came under intense online attack because we exposed the brutal drug war and the propaganda machine that was attacking journalists, news organizations, human rights defenders, and opposition politicians. The weaponization of social media was followed by lawfare, twisting the law to breakpoint to target those same groups. In 2018, the Philippine government tried to revoke Rappler's license to operate, and while we continued to fight it legally, within 4 months, we lost 49% of our advertising revenue. In less than 2 years, my government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. In order to travel, I have to ask permission from the courts. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. One of the times my travel was denied at the last minute was when my aging parents, both ill, had asked me to come to the United States because my mom was getting an operation. In the past 3 months, we've had 22 new complaints, potential new legal cases filed against us. Last Friday, we received 8 in one day, 8 subpoenas. That's a record for us. We must be doing something right, because not only did a sitting cabinet secretary sue 7 news organizations, including Rappler, but another is a petition at the Supreme Court by the Solicitor General alleging unfounded conspiracy theories against us. The majority of these complaints are connected to President Duterte's pastor, Apollo Quiboloy. He's wanted by the FBI. His company is leading the attack against journalists and human rights activists, and was recently awarded a television franchise. Last week, I testified in court in a case where the alleged tax we owed, 200,000 pesos, was far less than the 1.2 million I had already posted in that court in bail and bonds to stay free and working. All told, I could go to jail for the rest of my life because I refused to stop doing my job as a journalist. But I'm lucky. Remember, Senator Laila de Lima, a former Justice Secretary and head of the Commission on Human Rights, last month began her 6th year in prison. Amnesty International calls her a prisoner of conscience. Or young journalist Frenchie May Cumpio, she spent her last 2 birthdays in prison. Or former colleague Jess Manabanan, killed by a bullet to his head. He worked on Reuters' drug war series that won a Pulitzer Prize. Or ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, a newsroom I headed for 6 years, which in 2020 lost its franchise to operate. The last time that happened was when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in 1972. For the people who defend us, there are also costs. More lawyers have actually been killed than journalists under the Duterte administration. And the toll for human rights activists as of August last year hit over 420 dead. Last year on March 7th, 9 trade union leaders and human rights activists were killed in simultaneous morning police raids. We now call that Bloody Sunday. And the numbers killed in our brutal drug war, from thousands to tens of thousands. That's the first casualty in my nation's battle for facts. So that brings us to my second point, how technology has degraded facts and broken our societies. Like the age of industrialization, there's a new economic model that brought new harms, a model Shoshana Zuboff called surveillance capitalism, when our atomized personal experiences are collected by machine learning, organized by artificial intelligence, extracting our private lives for outsized corporate gain. Highly profitable micro-targeting operations are engineered to structurally undermine human will, a behavior modification system in which we are Pavlov's dogs, experimented on in real time with disastrous consequences. This is happening to you, to all of us around the world. These engagement-based metrics of American tech companies mean that the incentive structure of the algorithms, which is really just their opinion in code, implemented at a scale we could never have imagined, is insidiously shaping our future by encouraging the worst of human behavior. Studies have shown that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. The next few sentences I have said in every speech in the last 6 years. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these, we have no shared reality, no rule of law, no democracy. So what are we going to do? We can't solve the global existential problems if we don't win the battle for facts, and we cannot have integrity of elections if we don't have integrity of facts. In 42 days, the Philippines will vote in an existential moment for our democracy. The front runner for president is Ferdinand Marcos Jr. His family was ousted by a people power revolt 36 years ago. He's back partly because history was revised in plain view, with networks of disinformation, which we at Rappler exposed, releasing the data publicly. Our solution, how do we find a solution to deal with the viral speed of lies and the preferential distribution of anger and hate? We created a 4-layer pyramid, what we call hashtag #FactsFirstPH. I've submitted a copy for the members for you listening today. It begins with our communities, individuals reporting lies to our tip lines. That's the data layer that unites the pyramid. For the first time, at least 16 news groups are working together in that foundational layer. Once the fact checks are done, it moves to the mesh layer. Civil society groups, NGOs, schools, business groups, the church, religious groups joining together to mount their own campaigns for facts, creating a mesh of distribution. That data then travels to the third layer, the disinformation research groups finally working together, which weekly releases research to tell Filipinos exactly how we're being manipulated and by whom. Finally, the layer, the fourth that's long been needed, the law. Legal groups across the spectrum focused on filing tactical and strategic litigation. As news groups in the Philippines now face renewed and expanded DDoS attacks against our sites meant to take us down, these exponential lies are like DDoS attacks on our brains, attacking our biology, leaving us defenseless. The platforms and the autocrats that exploit them must be held accountable, and governments doing this must move at a faster pace. In that sense, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought nations together and may bring solutions for the continued impunity of platforms. For countries like the Philippines, consider Magnitsky sanctions. Democratic nations must stand together for democratic values. The solution is three-pronged and remain the core pillars of Rappler: technology, journalism, community. First, put guardrails around the tech, build better tech. Second, strengthen journalism and help fund independent news. Part of the reason I agreed to co-chair the International Fund for Public Interest Media. Third, build communities of action that stand by these democratic values. I could go to jail for the rest of my life just because I'm a journalist. But what I do now will determine whether that will happen. So I pledge to hold the line. These times demand more, and journalists have met and will meet those demands. Now it's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ressa. Now we turn to Ms. Bonyadi. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry.
I just realized I apologize. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thanks for inviting me to speak. Given that the Islamic Republic is ranked among the worst globally with respect to various human rights indices, the utter absence of a free media, the looming JCPOA agreement, and the tragedies surrounding the downing of flight PS752, my focus today will be on my homeland, Iran. Since the 1979 revolution, the denial of fair trials and due process have been symptoms of the Iranian authorities' disdain for the rule of law and those defending it, as well as tools for the monopolization of power and the persecution of those who challenge it. So sadly, it came as no surprise when security forces yet again unlawfully used lethal force and birdshot to crush mass protests over water shortages in Khuzestan and Lorestan provinces last year, killing at least 11 people and injuring scores more. And as you may know, in 2019, that number, as Reuters reported, was well over 1,500. Nor should we be surprised that Iran is suffering from an epidemic of torture. Amnesty International has documented that Iranian authorities have failed to provide accountability for at least 72 deaths in custody since January 2010, despite credible reports that they resulted from torture, ill treatment, or the lethal use of firearms and tear gas by officials. Leaked surveillance footage from Tehran's Evin prison in August 2021 showed prison guards beating, sexually harassing, and otherwise torturing prisoners. In the last year, several thousand men, women, and children, including human rights defenders, protesters, bereaved relatives demanding accountability, lawyers, journalists, environmentalists, dissidents, artists, writers, teachers, dual and foreign nationals have been interrogated and unfairly detained simply for exercising their rights to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. Hundreds remained wrongfully detained by the end of the year. Hundreds of women human rights defenders remain unjustly imprisoned in Iran, including lengthy sentences for at least 6 women who peacefully campaigned against compulsory veiling. In a brave act of civil disobedience, renowned rights defender Narges Mohammadi, who has spent the better part of the last 13 years behind bars for her peaceful advocacy, is resisting a prison summons she received on March 8th, deeming it unjust. The authorities have banned independent political parties, trade unions, and civil society organizations, censored media, and jammed satellite television channels. In January, the authorities added the messaging application Signal to the list of blocked social media platforms already, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The authorities imposed internet shutdowns during protests, hiding the scale of violations by security forces and preventing people from organizing. They continue to conceal the truth surrounding the January 2020 shooting down of flight PS752 by the Revolutionary Guards, which killed 176 people. It's important that as Canadian legislators, you recognize that the bereaved relatives of the victims seeking justice in Iran continue to face intimidation, harassment, arbitrary detention, torture, or other ill treatment. And it's imperative that Canada, along with Ukraine, the UK, Sweden, and Afghanistan, continue to collectively pursue full transparency, accountability, and justice. After a 43-year case study on the Islamic Republic and the rise to the presidency of Ebrahim Raisi, who has been a pillar of the oppressive state, implicated in crimes against humanity and whose leadership harkens back to 1980s Iran, it's become abundantly clear that a culture of impunity reigns supreme in the country, and the system is impervious to reform. We should remember that there is no avenue for justice through domestic channels in Iran, and Iranian victims of serious crimes committed by the Iranian authorities look to the international community to take meaningful action to ensure their rights. This is why Amnesty International and other NGOs have been urging member states of the UN Human Rights Council to support the creation of an impartial mechanism to collect, analyze, consolidate, and preserve evidence of the most serious crimes committed in Iran to facilitate future fair and independent criminal proceedings. We also urge member states to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. It's encouraging that Canada has been a lead sponsor of a UN resolution for the protection and promotion of human rights in Iran since 2003, when dual Iranian Canadian citizen and freelance photojournalist Zahra Kazemi was killed while in custody, and her medical examiner later testified that she had sustained brutal torture and rape. The support and promotion of such resolutions is the very least the people of Iran expect from the free world. For far too long, we've soft-pedaled human rights advocacy in our foreign policy, but human rights are intricately bound with respect for the rule of law, and there can be no good governance in the long run without the rule of law. Good and law-abiding governance not only makes for better regional neighbors, but also members of the international community. So it's not just a moral imperative that we prioritize human rights in our foreign policy. It's to our advantage that we don't allow it to be overshadowed by our geopolitical, economic, and other interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bonyadi. Now we will go to Mr. Leung. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Leung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me. I was my name is Becky Leung. I was a full-time breaking news journalist in Hong Kong for 6 years. I left Hong Kong and moved to the UK this January due to safety concerns. I'm now a contract traffic warden working for the City Council. But since the closure of Apple Daily and prosecutions of those chiefs in the company, journalists in Hong Kong are under turbulence. I'm not the only one who gave up the career I love and feel proud of, leaving Hong Kong and working a rather meaningless job in order to survive in a free country. And I'm sure you know what that turbulence means, but allow me to give you some summary and numbers. The Hong Kong government has been attacking independent media for some time, but the heaviest blow was using the national security law to freeze access of news outlet. That's what happened to Apple Daily last June, and then Stand News in December. Arresting top executives of media outlets and seizing computers would obviously affect the work of journalists, but not as much as freezing assets. As people cannot
Mr. Lunga,
Thank you.
apologies for interrupting you. Could I ask that you keep your microphone closer to your mouth? Because the translators are
Is it
having
o-
a difficult time.
Is it okay?
That's much
Is it
better.
now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. I will continue. Arresting top executives of media outlets and seizing computers would obviously affect the work of journalists, but not as much as freezing access, as people cannot work if they're not paid. After those two outlets was forcefully closed, the third outlet, Citizen News, chose to cease operations, saying that they cannot allow their younger staff to face risks of arrest when they can no longer tell what is risky and what's not. For media outlets that are still running, the picture is green too. At the public broadcaster RTHK, many news programs are cancelled for their critical reporting. More than 300 episodes of award-winning program Hong Kong
I'm
Connections.
sorry, Mr. Leung, terribly sorry. We're hearing from the interpreters once again. Can you hold it closer to your mouth if possible?
I think it.
Yeah, it's not. It's too close, yeah.
More than 300 episodes of award-winning program Hong Kong Connections were moved online. As this is the much I can. Is it okay?
Is that better? No? Did you say a few lines? Just a few, just because we're
hi.
testing.
Can you hear me just right?
We can
Is
hear.
it better?
No?
Yeah.
Terribly sorry about that, Mr. Leung, because some of the members require French. So could I ask that in lieu of doing your remarks, if you would kindly and graciously send us your written submission, we
Yep,
will
of course,
ensure
yes.
that every member does receive it. But given these technical complications, if we could just go to rounds of questioning now.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Liu. So our first round of questions consists of 7 minutes for each member that's here present or online. And our first member is Mr. Samir Zuberi.
I want to thank all the witnesses for being here and for your courage. I fully recognize how challenging it is for each and every one of you to be advocating in the spaces you're in, knowing that what you say, you're going to receive a lot of headwind, you're going to be obviously heavily critiqued, in many cases your safety is in danger, even if you're outside of your country of origin. And for Ms. Risa, strength to you. I know that you're fighting a very important fight, and this is extremely challenging, but we wish you strength and courage. I'd like to start off with Ms. Risa. I actually heard you on CBC's The House. It's often listened to here in Canada, a radio program, I should say, by most of us here, and those who follow what happens in Parliament. I wanted to allow you to elaborate some more on technology, the nexus of technology along with human rights and the way how you were talking about, us moving from our natural state to an agitated state, and how that's employed by those who want to undermine human rights. Ms. Risa, please. Yeah.
Sure. I think I can talk about this on two fronts, which is, first how so much of the debate on this is kind of further downstream. So how to think about it, because the very first part of fighting for human rights or free expression actually begins with having the facts. So right now, the platforms, all want you to debate content moderation, right? Which is the furthest downstream. If you're stuck here, the platforms make more money out of surveillance capitalism. So what we need to do is to really move further upstream here to the operating system, which is the algorithmic amplification. That's incredibly important. That's what, a great book, Weapons of Math Destruction, calls the opinion in code, right? Once you're there, you then move further upstream to the root cause. And that's all the way here. So we start from here. That's surveillance capitalism. And that's where all of the problems connect that seems to be siloed. That includes safety, privacy, antitrust, and content moderation. Part of our problem now is that these have been exploited by geopolitical power. These networks now form a global nervous system of what I call toxic sludge, and that's fueled by nations like China, Russia. In 2018, we connected the information operations in the Philippines with Russian disinformation networks through websites in Canada. In 2020, Facebook took down information operations from China that were creating fake accounts for the US elections. In the Philippines, those same accounts were polishing the image of the Marcoses, campaigning for Duterte's daughter, and attacking me and Rappler. In 2021, the US and the EU called out China and Russia for COVID-19 disinformation. I guess I want to just emphasize how connected we all are. The upside here is that we're starting to see more legislation. Just last week, the European Union hammered out the last details of the Market Services Act. That's to be followed by the Digital Services Act. I know Canada has this also in play, but these two will take time. I continue, as I did in the Nobel lecture, to appeal to US legislators to reform or revoke Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because we at the front lines need immediate help.
Very quickly, do you think it's important that parliamentarians have the algorithms of social media companies manifest to us so we can actually do a deeper dive into this, or do you think that's appropriate and that we actually, more than that, must do it quickly? If you can answer, because I'd like to go to shift the conversation to Iran after.
Absolutely. You need to demand greater transparency in those algorithms of amplification. Because think about it like this, right? It's like you do this with drugs. We take that apart, we take down to the ingredients of it. It's the same thing with algorithmic amplification. Why does it remain a black box? The sooner you do it, the better it will be for all of us.
Thank you so much. I'd like to shift gears for a moment and go to Ms. Bonadi. I hope I pronounced your name relatively correct. You mentioned Nargis Mohammadi. You just touched upon her lightly. I've heard about her. If you can please shed some light in terms of what her latest act of civil disobedience was, and anything else you'd like to share with this committee.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say how I'm in awe of Ms. Risa and Mr. Leung. And thank you so much for all you do. Nargis Mohammadi is, equally brave, putting her own life at risk inside Iran. As a long-time human rights defender, I recently spoke to her. She actually wanted me to relay this to the members here on the committee, that she thinks she's bravely defying a prison summons that she received a few weeks ago. She spent the better part of 13 years in prison for her peaceful human rights advocacy. She spent 4 times in solitary confinement. The last time was 64 days, of which 40 days were completely incommunicado, no access to a lawyer, nothing. And yet she's risking all of this again, her safety, her security. And she asks of you that when international lawmakers or anyone with any kind of connection to Iran making an official visit to the country meets with someone inside the country. Now I understand Canada doesn't have those official ties, but anyone who does goes to Iran to meet someone like the foreign minister, demands that they first meet with someone like Narges, so that they amplify the voices of civil society inside the country, so that civil society, dissidents, know that those people, those officials, those foreign officials have not taken the side of their oppressors over them. This is very important that we give those people platforms. This is Narges's request to all of you, is that we platform people like her, that we don't simply allow people like Zarif, former foreign minister, to write op-eds in our Western newspapers, that we give platforms and voice to dissidents inside Iran and strengthen civil society in that way. And Narges is really a champion of that in so many ways, uplifting people like her, like Nasrin Sotoudeh, like Atena Daemi, and countless other brave activists is very important. And I'd just like to add, on the subject of journalism inside Iran, while the world was so focused, rightfully so, on the atrocious death and tragedy of Jamal Khashoggi, what we didn't do is we completely overlooked Ruhollah Zam, who was lured to Iraq, abducted, taken to Iran, and executed after a grossly unfair trial. So we're really not hearing enough about the struggles of civil society inside Iran.
Thank you very much. We now turn to Mr. Cooper. You have 7 minutes, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I was going to actually direct my questions to Mr. Long, but obviously we weren't able to hear from him because I'm very much interested in the situation in Hong Kong. So I look very much forward to his brief. With him unable to...
Mr. Cooper, I
yes.
think we can still try. Let's just give it a shot, and we'll see what it's like, and if the interpreters can pick it up.
Okay. Well, we have seen a systematic campaign to dismantle democratic institutions in Hong Kong since 2020, including a significant media crackdown, including, as Mr. Long pointed out, Apple News in June of 2021, followed by Stand News, and then Citizen News shut down, citing the closure of Stand News as the main reason. Ronson Chan, the head of the Hong Kong Journalists Association and a former editor of Stand News, said, quote, with respect to the national security law, there's very little room given by the law. If you are not in trouble yet, the authorities will get you at some point. Would you concur with that that is the environment that journalists face in Hong Kong today? And maybe more broadly speaking, in describing the situation, you have been a journalist in Hong Kong since 2013. I think it would be helpful if you could perhaps walk through how the landscape in Hong Kong has changed over that period of time.
I mean, I absolutely concur with Mr. Chan's comment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me right?
That's much better.
The point is, I mean, that is the reason why so many journalists chose to leave their career and leave Hong Kong, because if there is a red line that we know, then we can at least know where the red line is, and then we self-censor ourselves. But the problem is we don't know the red line. We don't know where the red line is. For example, the authorities are charging media outlets for publishing seditious comments, but actually that was a law that was in the long back before 1997. It was the law for people to become seditious against the Queen, and then they just the problem is if they cannot find a law that suits you. I mean, if they cannot find the right law right law, they will find one that suits you, no matter it is historical or what. And I was a journalist since 2015. It's right after the social movement in after 2014. And during my experience, the relationship between the authorities and journalists are quickly deteriorating. We don't talk anymore on scenes. We always argue. They make request that it's sorry. When I'm nervous, my English got real bad. They have unreasonable request. We have to, stand 100 meters from the scene so that we cannot film what's happening. So I think it's going to get worse. Actually, I should not be the one to appear in front of you today, but the thing is, people from the men and women who are still fighting to safeguard what's left in Hong Kong, they cannot speak for themselves without bearing the risk of breaching so-called national security. That is the reason why, as a former journalist, I'm speaking in front of you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Can you speak to some of the tactics that the police are using to suppress the free press, to attack journalists? We've certainly seen detentions in which I believe the maximum penalty is life in prison under national security law. But can you just elaborate on some of the other measures that the regime is taking that is having a chilling effect on the state of independent journalism in Hong Kong?
They jailed the top chiefs, such as Stevie Lai or the editors of SDIR News. But that's the top one. Like me, I worked on the front line during 2019. It's about physical attack, pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson, the interpretation hasn't been working for the past 36 seconds, and I cannot hear Mr. Long's answers.
We're having technical challenges again. If I could just ask that the question that was just posed to you, if you could just kindly prepare a response to that,
course, yeah.
And we will ensure that Mr. Cooper does receive it.
Yep. I'm sorry about
Terribly
that.
sorry about that.
How much time do I have?
You have another minute.
I have a minute. Okay, well, I will then ask, and maybe I'll follow up with the witness, Ms. Benotti? Madam Benotti? Okay, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Benotti, yes.
Yes.
No problem.
So I do have some questions for you on the situation in Iran, but since we just have a very limited period of time, would you agree that the human rights situation on the ground in Iran has deteriorated since Raisi was installed?
Yes, thank you for the question. I do think that Ebrahim Raisi, the election last year, which had the lowest turnout in the past 43 years, is very telling. And, people are completely disgruntled. And, there's, unfortunately, as the logic goes, democracies, there's nothing wrong with a democracy that can't be fixed with what is right with a democracy. And the opposite is true with a country like Iran, where the very pillars of the system prevent the wrongs being made right. Unfortunately, that's true whether people call themselves hardliners or reformists. Otherwise, after 43 years, reform would have happened. So do I think it's deteriorated? Yes, but I don't think it's like saying it's gone from, F to even worse than that, So, I just don't, the system is completely broken as the daughter of former President Rafsanjani said, you know, there is a huge disillusionment with the system because there's no way to fix it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Now we turn to Monsieur Trudel.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to our three witnesses. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to hear completely from Mr. Long. His comments struck me as highly interesting. Ms. Bonaladi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm kind of Frenchifying it. But during the pandemic, this country, in fact, banished Doctors Without Borders from the country. What were the reasons and what were the grounds for expelling them? How could they do this, given that that organization provided valuable information about human rights both in Iran and Lithuania? How is that possible?
Merci beaucoup. I could answer that question, but the truth of the matter is that the government, Iranian authorities, prioritize revolutionary ideology before the well-being of the people. That is what the Iranian people are facing, is that there is no real interest in protecting the Iranian people. The real interest of the Iranian authorities is protecting the revolutionary ideology, the revolution itself. And you know, it's telling that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is tasked with protecting the revolution. The word Iran or Iranian isn't even in the acronym. So that should tell you everything about how these authorities, the Islamic Republic, feels about Iran and the Iranian people. What I will say is that decisions made inside Iran have not benefited, even when there was sanctions relief the first time around under President Obama. You know, the money that went to Iran didn't reap any benefits for the Iranian people. Money was still going to Hamas and Hezbollah and Assad, and nothing really changed on the ground as far as human rights goes in any tangible way. And the people didn't reap the benefits. So, you know, for the same reason that vaccines, US vaccine, Western vaccines were banned from entering the country, these people are not interested in the well-being of the Iranian people.
Merci, Madame Boniadi.
Thank you very much. Are you aware of the Nasrin Sotoudeh Code? An Iranian lawyer, human rights, as a human rights defender. Are you aware of this individual? Could you elaborate on that about that person, please?
Yes, Nasrin Sotoudeh is an extraordinary human rights lawyer who has received 38 years, unjustly received 38 years, simply because she has protected and defended her clients and tried to use the law as much as she can. The penal code isn't very friendly towards women in Iran, but she's used to go with that and try to find ways to defend her clients legally. And yet every time the door has been closed in her face and she has been sent to jail. And yet she keeps going. I know she's on temporary leave from prison, but she's still serving her 38-year sentence. She's, of course, internationally renowned and celebrated. She's one of the biggest names as far as human rights defenders inside the country. She's always been a pillar of strength and a role model for everyone else. And, you know, the thing at the heart of what she's saying is that women and men should be treated equally. And the Iranian penal code simply doesn't offer that. It's still based on Sharia law, and women are seen as half the value of a man before the law inside Iran. And much like Nargis and others, you know, the injustice towards women is really far outweighs the injustice towards men inside the country as far as sentencing. A woman who is campaigning against compulsory hijab can receive 18 years in prison, for example, whereas a man who kills his daughter, you know, in an honor killing, quote unquote, can receive just months. or a few years. And there's no real justice for women. And Nasrin has been at the forefront of the fight.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bonyadi. Now I'd like to direct my attention to Ms. Aressa. You spoke briefly earlier about the opinion prisoner, Ms. Leila Deligna, this prisoner of conscience. Could you please elaborate on that particular case?
Thank you for the question. Senator De Lima is now campaigning from prison. The charges against her when she was imprisoned in 2017, February of 2017, were largely brought by convicts in prison and given some kind of incentives by the government. Many of them have now disappeared, and she still remains in prison. What part of the reason is it seems based on the actions of President Duterte and his words that she had used her position in the Senate to begin investigations into the brutal drug war. He had threatened her, and she was arrested and is now in prison without bail. It's something that it happened so early, 2017, that even journalists were stunned by this. And I thought, no, if a government is doing this, there must be something there. But then, of course, when the charges against me were just lies, I began to realize later on that this is a pattern and law has been weaponized.
Merci. Dites-moi. Je suis désolé, je prends une pause parce que
Sorry, I was still listening to the interpretation and there was a bit of lag. I apologize. The Anti-Terrorism Act.
Écoutez,
the Republican Act, Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, how did that affect peace activists and human rights defenders, please?
It's beyond a chilling effect. It is glacial. It came about around the same time as Hong Kong's the security law, and what it did is it just meant that you could be arrested without a warrant. I mean, this is the impact on people. You could be arrested for a warrant without a warrant and held in prison for up to 24 days. I'll just have to double check those numbers, but beyond that as well, the Supreme Court, there were many petitions that were filed at the Supreme Court to roll it back. The Supreme Court has rolled some elements back, but it still remains, and it hangs like a Damocles sword on any human rights defender. Now, what we've seen also is that social media has been weaponized to, the phrase in the Philippines is red tag. It's essentially comparing a human rights defender to a terrorist and using the same principles that you heard from Matthew against journalists and human rights defenders.
merci infiniment, Madame.
Thank you very much.
Now we turn to Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to say thank you to all of our witnesses for being here tonight. This is such an honor to hear from you. I know people have said this before this evening, but I recognize your to do the work that you do and your bravery and your courageous commitment to truth and to journalism is recognized, certainly by this committee. I want to start, I think, with Ms. Reza, if I could. I read your Nobel Peace speech that you gave in October when you accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, and I have to say that it was incredibly moving, very, very chilling, of course, in parts as well. And I want to quote that you put in your comments that highly profitable micro-targeting operations are engineered to structurally undermine human will, a behavior modification system in which we are Pavlov's dogs. You further go on to say that these destructive corporations have siphoned money away from news groups and now pose a foundational threat to markets and elections. obviously extremely terrifying. And I think something that we can all recognize is not restricted to the Philippines, not restricted to any one democracy or non-democracy in the world, that we are all implicated by this, and this impacts all of us. You spoke today in your comments about the need for legislation, and I do know that it is hopefully something that will be coming forward. But we have brought forward legislation in this country, or the government has brought forward legislation, and the pushback that we see in terms of attacks on human rights, many people, many members of the opposition have stood in the House and said that these laws that would control social media are wrong. How do you get around that? How do you counter that argument so that we actually can have legislation in place that holds social media to account?
Thank you so much for the question. First of all, it's an old argument that isn't true. Again, freedom of speech is upheld as the most sacred right in the West. But right now, think about it, and human rights activists have said this: the right to freedom of speech of a few people is actually encroaching on the right to life of many more, and the right to safety and the right to dignity. Look at genocide in Myanmar, for example. I think if we all agree that facts exist, that makes it objective, which leads to truth, which leads to trust. So I kind of tried to show how content, the debate on content is all the way downstream. The legislation should come further upstream at the algorithmic amplification and directly at the surveillance capitalism, which, again, the basic question of data privacy: who owns the data? Should these large companies, American companies, own our private lives? But beyond that as well, I think I just thank you for bringing up something I failed to mention, but mentioned in the Nobel lecture: gendered disinformation, right? The other reason why we need to do that is that human rights defenders, women journalists, women politicians also deserve the right to free speech. And right now, freedom of speech is being used to stifle and pound women and vulnerable sectors to silence. It's information operations. I think Canada, like the US, now has a serious problem with the way women in politics and journalism are being targeted. And the same patterns of abuse that you see in repressive regimes are now made possible in your societies by these social media platforms. I can also send a study that was done. It's #She Persisted, a white paper that was done in Canada based on discussions with journalists and women in politics.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. And I, as a female politician, I have to say I 100% agree with you that we are silenced in ways that are different, that there are gendered impacts. And I think one of the things that you also mentioned is the impacts on journalism. So one of the things that I know that we've looked at a lot as parliamentarians is how we protect journalism as a necessity, as a necessary pillar of a democracy, and how when we look at social media being the place where people get their journalism, when we recognize that social media is a place where facts and news and media is in fact not valued, what are those things that a democracy like Canada needs to do to protect the journalists that are doing the vital work? Because I don't know if you know, but we had a freedom convoy in Canada that was very much calling out our media for being fake news. They were trying to dismantle our democracy in Canada in January. Like, this is not ancient history or something happening somewhere else.
These are all symptoms of the same crucial problem, which is this supposed freedom of speech is being used to pound. And when you say something a million times, you say a lie a million times, it becomes a fact. In the age of abundance, in the age of social media. And I think that's a fundamental difference. And I'm going to, again, I'm sorry to keep bringing it up to me, but these lessons are so incredibly personal and macro. So it's micro and macro. I will also send you UNESCO study and the International Center for Journalists study on almost 500,000 social media attacks against me. That it's the first big data case study that was done. And you can see there how 60% of the attacks were meant to tear down my credibility, 40% were meant to tear down my spirit. And I use that as an example. That is what is being done to women journalists, women politicians. That is what is being done to news organizations. So I actually say this to news organizations, that we still feel we have the power. It's like a vestigial tale. The real power of distribution is with technology. And those do not have any guardrails at all right now. It is profit at all costs.
Yeah, the guardrails is vital. And I know I'm running out of time, but I did want to ask Ms. Bondadi, I'm sure I said it wrong as well, but I wanted to ask very quickly, you spoke about the fact that we don't have those diplomatic ties. Canada does not have those diplomatic ties with Iran. And I represent a riding that many of the victims from Flight PS 752 lived in my riding. It has changed the face of the university in my riding. And I just wonder, would it be better for us to have those diplomatic ties so that we can promote the voices, or is it better for us to ignore a government that is failing to meet human rights standards?
Thank you for the question. I think it's really important that we don't have double standards in our foreign policy. So for when we're calling for sanctioning Putin, who is terrorizing Ukraine, why would we then have diplomatic ties with Iranian authorities who are terrorizing their own people? I think that we have to, we can't say, well, it's okay what you do to your own people, just don't do it to other people. And I think that justice for the people, for the bereaved relatives of those who've lost loved ones on the flight, can come in the form of following up on investigations and making sure that facts are found. Accountability and transparency are very important. And I just want to add on the tail of Ms. Rees's remarks, that dissidents inside of Iran are not the only targets. It's also dissidents abroad. So if we look at the case of Masih Alinejad, who is an incredibly brave female Iranian journalist, US based, whose brother has been imprisoned and sentenced to 8 years in prison to silence her, we realize that these autocracies, these oppressive governments, don't stop at their own borders. They also are trying to silence everyone outside who is raising their voices, particularly women. They are particularly scared of women like Masih. And so I think it's really important that we collectively, even if we don't have ties with Iran, empower civil society, not only inside Iran, by supporting independent media, which is so incredibly important, because of course it's state-owned media inside Iran, but also making sure that we support people like Masih Alinejad, who's created the Touche app, so that when there is an internet blackout, if you have this app in Iran, you have access to real news, what's going on in the world, and how to connect and organize. These are all ways that we can help the Iranian people.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you. Now, since we're out of time, there are 4 members who still remain for the second round. I will provide you each with 1 question. Apologies, but we're way over. And that is, so it would be Mr. Vandenbeld, Mr. Cooper, and Mr. Trudeau. My apologies, Ms. McPherson, you were way over in your segment, so it's just the 3 remaining members. Yes, Ms. Vandenbeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know how to choose just 1 question. I do want to say to all of the witnesses today, I think I speak for all parliamentarians, that in the face of great personal cost, we tremendously admire and respect your courage. My question is for Maria Ressa. It's good to see you again. I note that it's the second time I've heard you testify before the Canadian Parliament. The last time was the Grand Committee of the Ethics, Privacy and Information Committee about the dataopolies and the large social media platforms. So my question is to you. we know that you've talked about the need to look at the algorithms, to look at the transparency of what underlies the amplification on these social media platforms, which is a very different thing than the argument that's made back that you're somehow censoring content. If you could talk a little bit about the way in which legislators can work across jurisdictions, because we know that the large social media platforms will move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and if regulations are different, it can be very difficult to regulate them. So how is it that we as the Canadian Parliament can ensure that we're working in concert with other legislatures around the world to be able to truly have an impact when it comes to the proliferation of this undermining of truth that you've spoken about?
Thank you so much for your question, and I'll quickly respond to that by saying that the biggest problem we face today is that the laws we have evolved in the physical world don't exist in the virtual world. And in many ways, we have all fallen to this idea that the virtual world is different from the real world, but it isn't. We only live in one reality. So something very simple, something that the platforms have done, which is after January 6th in the United States, after that violence, Facebook did its break glass moment, which is it turned up something it called the news ecosystem quality, which is news ecosystem quality news, right? Facts. And when they did that, all of a sudden, CrowdTangle, which is a tool that shows you which are the top 10, all of a sudden you had NPR, the New York Times, you had the news organizations that are liable for their content, then come up in the top 10. But that only stayed for a few weeks because after it became safe again, they turned it back down. And then you have the toxic sludge come back up again. Why? It made less money. So first, I think, is one, insist that the laws of the real world are in the virtual world. And that doesn't require new laws. It does require accountability. Sidestepping accountability for distribution is the wrong thing to do. And we have allowed that for too long.
Next, we go to Mr. Cooper.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will direct my question to Ms. Bonatti. In terms of holding the Iranian regime accountable for, among other things, the downing of the Ukrainian Airlines flight PS 752, do you believe that the Government of Canada should designate the IRGC as a terrorist entity, just as it has with respect to the Quds Force?
Thank you for the question. I do think that the IRGC has terrorized the Iranian people and the region. And I think that what's most important is when we look at our foreign policy with Iran, things like the JCPOA should never overshadow human rights inside Iran. And when I say that, we would be wise to remember the words of former US ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, who said arms controllers didn't end the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Democrats, small d Democrats inside Russia and other Soviet republics did. And similarly, Karim Sajjadpour, who's an Iran scholar, wrote in The Atlantic that the US-Iran Cold War will likely be concluded not by American diplomats, but by Iranian Democrats. So what we have to do is make sure that we're empowering those Democrats. I don't think that, I think that holding the IRGC accountable is a way to empower those Democrats inside Iran to find freedom. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. And the last question goes to Monsieur Trudel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. My question is for Ms. Ressa. In December 2021, the International Criminal Court declared that crimes were committed in the war on drugs, and they were going to decide in 2022 whether there'd be an investigation. Are you aware whether an inquiry has been opened, and should Canada lobby the International Criminal Court to open an investigation or inquiry?
Yes, absolutely. This is being closely watched in the Philippines, partly because it comes down to systems of accountability. Will anyone be responsible for these drug wars? Violence, which continues today, it's taken a bit of a backseat. But I think the most critical part of this is to also look at what is upcoming. We have not just our elections, but also looking at how the human rights. Please closely monitor the Universal Periodic Review process at the UN Human Rights Council, which will be in October. But the deadline for submissions from civil society is on March 31st, and the UN Human Rights Committee review, that's also in October. The more pressure that is put on this, the more the greater chances the deaths will stop.
Merci, Madame Aressa.
Thank you very much.
Particular note, allow me to thank all three of our panelists, Ms. Ressa, Ms. Bonyadi, Mr. Lung. We are certainly very, very honored to have had you. Your erudition, your insight, some of the sobering facts that you shared with us obviously have very much elevated our understanding of troubled countries around the world. So we're very, very grateful to have had you. Mr. Lung, again, just wanted to extend to you our apologies for the technical problems you had. But if there is any issue that did arise in the questions and you would like to respond to those, please do kindly do so, and we will make sure that it is distributed amongst the members here. Thank you for this. Bye-bye. Sorry? Yes, we will be, for the members, we will be suspending temporarily for 5 minutes. have you all with us. Our apologies for going overtime with the first panel, but we're certainly very much looking forward to hearing from you. We have 4 experts on this panel for the benefit of the members. We have Ms. Rachel Pulfer, the Executive Director of Journalists for Human Rights. We have Ms. Judith Abitan, the Executive Director of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. We have Ms. Rachel Kay, Deputy Executive Director of IFEX. And we have Mr. Mark Clifford, President of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. Now, each of the panelists, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And once that is done, and we have heard from each of you, then the members will be asking you questions. Now, the first speaker will be Ms. Pulfer. You have 5 minutes, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, et merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the other witnesses for your interesting points of view, and also to the members of this committee for your invitation. It's an honor to be here with you and to share a number of notions and the work that journalists are doing that we are focusing on. And I'd just like to acknowledge all these civilians who are working so hard to assist journalists in danger. I'd like to thank you for this hard and complicated work. My name is Rachel Pulfer, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Human Rights Journalists. This is a not-for-profit organization that seeks to help journalists and promote access to human rights worldwide.
It's a Canadian-based media development organization that works to promote access to human rights worldwide. We do this through strengthening media's ability to cover human rights stories in places where commitment to media freedoms and human rights is fragile. Currently, we do this work across 17 countries, including Mali, Iraq, and Yemen. Over the past 6 months, we have worked to evacuate journalists under threat from Afghanistan, and this is the work that I want to focus on in this discussion. But I wouldn't be a good journalist if I didn't start this talk with a story. And so I'm going to share with you the story of Khatara Ahmadi, a female TV anchor with Zan TV. Zan TV was an all-woman television station based in Kabul. It produced news and feature content in Afghanistan up until August 15th of last year. After the fall of Kabul, Khatara and her colleagues went into hiding. They knew that as women who'd had a high public profile, they would have targets on their backs. Journalists for Human Rights evacuated Khatara and some of her colleagues from Kabul in October of 2021. Ever since then, she has been stuck in Islamabad. As an Afghan refugee, every door is closed to her, bar the one she went through to get to Pakistan. When she arrived, Khatara was pregnant. Within weeks, she miscarried. Khatara desperately needs a permanent place to settle. Yet months of effort by a coalition of media freedoms organizations, including Journalists for Human Rights, has so far secured nothing. She is just one of 500 journalists, women leaders, and human rights defenders and their family members that Journalists for Human Rights has worked to help since August 15th from Afghanistan. In recent weeks, JHR has been approached in a similar way by increasing numbers by Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian journalists, all in the same desperate situation. The reporting work that they did before Putin's invasion of Ukraine has put them in danger. They need options urgently. Luckily, you, the members of this committee, are in a position to help provide them with options. And so I'd like to recommend that Canada take immediate, concrete action for journalists fleeing conflict and persecution, journalists like Khatara, by creating an evergreen program of emergency visas for journalists. This is in line with recommendations from both the high-level legal panel of experts advising the Media Freedom Coalition, of which Canada is co-chair, and also IFEX, from whom you're going to hear later in this discussion. On media freedom and human rights globally, we're seeing a global erosion in the state of media freedom through COVID-19. And the rise of authoritarianism threatens democracies and human rights worldwide. As Freedom House put it in their most recent report, the global order is nearing a tipping point. And if democracy's defenders do not work together to help guarantee freedom for all people, the authoritarian model will prevail. What can we do to roll this situation back? Organizations such as Journalists for Human Rights intervene to strengthen independent journalists' ability to cover human rights. Since 2016, starting in South Sudan, Journalists for Human Rights partnered with Global Affairs Canada to strengthen the quote-unquote enabling environment in which journalists work. This means a very holistic form of media development work across government, media, and civil society, ensuring and building on society-wide support for independent journalists covering human rights stories. We also train journalists on how to safely call out and debunk the kinds of disinformation campaigns that Maria Ressa referenced earlier in this discussion. Never has this kind of work been more needed than right now. Earlier today, for example, Novaya Gazeta, the last independent newspaper in Russia, closed its doors under pressure from Russian state censors. We need to ensure, in the face of gross state repression, that newspapers like Novaya Gazeta are not censored and silenced, but rather find ways to live on. We need to ensure, in the face of gross manipulation of information, that citizens in places like Russia, Belarus, and Afghanistan have access to facts and truth. The best way to counterattack the trend to authoritarianism and decaying support for human rights and liberal democracy is through support for independent journalism covering human rights issues. The best way to fight the state-sponsored lies of regimes such as Vladimir Putin's is with facts and truth. And that brings me to my second ask. And again, this is in line with IFEX's petition to the Media Freedoms Coalition in February, calling on Canada to step up and put aside up to 1% of its international development support towards this kind of media development work. This level of support is necessary in order to fund the kind of holistic, sector-wide networking and capacity building work that ensures those enduring conflict have access to reliable information about what is happening through the conflict and beyond, in particular information on human rights. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pulford. Now we turn to Ms. Abbotan. You have 5 minutes and approximately 30 seconds before we reach that 5 minutes. I will be putting up a sign. The floor is yours, Ms. Abbotan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, distinguished members of the subcommittee, for inviting Professor Kotler to discuss the case and cause of Mr. David Isaac. Professor Kotler is unable to appear for medical reasons and has asked me to testify on his behalf, as I am associated with him in these matters. He also asked that I convey his highest regard for this committee, on which he served both as chair and vice chair during his parliamentary experience, and which he regards as reflective and representative of the pursuit of justice and a rules-based international order. In 2001, the Eritrean government shut down the entire independent press in Eritrea. Mr. Isaac, a Swedish Eritrean playwright, author, and courageous journalist with Setit, Eritrea's first independent newspaper, was arbitrarily detained, held incommunicado, denied access to family, consular assistance, the right to counsel, and any semblance of constitutional rights and due process. His crime? Setit had published an open letter criticizing the concentration of power and demanding democratic reform and human rights in Eritrea, signed by 15 members of President Isaias Afwerki's government. No independent media has operated in Eritrea since Mr. Isaac's arrest. The World Press Freedom Index has ranked Eritrea last out of 180 countries for more than a decade, behind China and North Korea. In 2019, the Committee to Protect Journalists designated Eritrea the most censored country in the world. There is reason to believe that Mr. Isaac is being held in the Erero prison camp, one of a network of secret prisons where thousands of political prisoners are held in what Amnesty International calls unimaginably atrocious conditions. Indeed, Mr. Isaac has been denied any semblance of justice and human dignity and continues to be the victim of ongoing crimes against humanity. This past September marked 20 years of detention for Mr. Isaac. He and his colleagues are the longest detained journalists in the world today. Mr. Isaac's case is not only emblematic of the assault on the safety and security of journalists, but also of the assault on our rules-based international order. It is a case study of the global assault on media freedom by authoritarian regimes whose exculpatory immunity continues to intensify and whose perpetrators only continue to be emboldened by the global pandemic of impunity. Mr. Isaac's dual Swedish and Eritrean citizenship also make this a unique case and one that deserves and one that serves, as a looking glass into the raison d'etre for the Canadian-led declaration of arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations. Accordingly, Sweden has a particular nexus to this case and related domestic and international legal responsibilities in this regard. As the report on consular protection for journalists at risk abroad of the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom on which Professor Kotler serves states, diplomatic protection is not a matter of discretion. It is an international legal obligation, an obligation that devolves on the country, the nationality of the imprisoned journalist, and that devolves on the country that is detaining the journalist. The Eritrean government has also repeatedly ignored every petition and relevant ruling for Mr. Isaac's release, including a petition for writ of habeas corpus before the Supreme Court of Eritrea in 2011, and a final and binding ruling by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in 2016. In a word, this impunity has only been incentivized by the absence of concerted action by the community of democracies on behalf of Mr. Isaac. What now follows is a summary of key policy recommendations and legal avenues. First, Canada should engage the signatories of the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations to secure the implementation of this declaration. Indeed, the case of Mr. Isaac is the very raison d'etre and the very case study of the adoption of such a declaration. Second, Canada needs to impose targeted Magnitsky sanctions in a concerted fashion within a multilateral framework on the senior Eritrean officials involved in acts of corruption and rights violations against Mr. Isaac and his colleagues, a move advocated last October by an international coalition of leading NGOs, human rights organizations, experts, advocates, and journalists, of which the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights was one of them. Indeed, the importance of Magnitsky sanctions re-imprisoned journalists was the first recommendation of the high-level panel of experts on media freedom. Third, we should support the call of leading UN experts, those engaged in the UN Human Rights Council special procedures, who themselves have called on the urgent and immediate release of Mr. Isaac. Fourth, we need to implement the 2016 recommendations of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea and refer the case to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Fifth, Canada, which serves as co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition, which has pledged itself to safeguard media freedom, the safety and security of journalists, should engage the members of the coalition in the case of Mr. Isaac, an emblematic case study for the Media Freedom Coalition. Sixth, and I soon come to a close, Canada should lead an inquiry at the Human Rights Council, re the case of Mr. Isaac. Seventh, Canada should factor in Eritrea's assault on the rules-based international order in its bilateral Canadian-Eritrean relationship. And finally, Sweden should be invited to exercise a panoply of legal remedies, which it could have taken and can still undertake, to secure justice for Mr. Isaac and his colleagues and accountability for the Eritrean perpetrators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abatan. We now turn to Ms. Kay from IFEX. You have 5 minutes.
First of all, thank you, honorable ministers, for this opportunity. I'm here tonight on behalf of IFEX, a global network of groups defending freedom of expression and information in all its forms. Our aim is to increasingly leverage this work in the form of press freedom, access to information, and safety and justice for journalists, among other rights. Like others that spoke tonight, we are seeing the expansion of authoritarianism in all its forms. Information is being weaponized in ways that has a profound impact on people and is creating a kind of information chaos. In our network alone, misuse of access to information legislation, internet shutdowns, misinformation, attacks on media, and of course, the murder of journalists is becoming routine. And as the previous session highlighted, when those targeted directly with online disinformation and smear campaigns are women, the form the attacks take is usually gendered and often results in self-censorship. The aim is to silence these voices, and it is doing just that. We can see this played out in the current context. Immediate action is required in the most urgent situations: Afghanistan, Belarus, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Nicaragua, Sudan, and Ukraine, Russia, just to name a few. As my colleague Rachel recommended, it's imperative that coordinated system of emergency support for journalists at risk and their families is created, something where we see Canada is already moving in the right direction, but we must continue to increase our effectiveness. And to be effective, these systems should include providing emergency visas that have simple and secure methods of submission, and in the absence of such, they should expedite the processing of visas for journalists and their families, as well as ensure safe passage. Key to this is effective coordination with local and international civil society organizations like Journalists for Human Rights, working to protect and evacuate journalists. We see that media freedom has never been more crucial. Democracies cannot survive and flourish without free, independent, and pluralistic media. We need to reverse engineer the current branding of the media as fake news and the enemy of the people as normal. It's been a lexicon adopted around the world, language mimicked and acted upon that includes continued verbal and physical attacks on the media with total impunity. This has had a profound impact on press freedom and journalists in particular, and be sure there's no country, including Canada, that's exempt from this trend. This narrative needs to be countered forcefully with words and actions. Outside of intervening in urgent situations, the government must play a significant ongoing role in reinforcing the importance of press freedom and respect for journalists in its own national context. There is also need for accountability. The criminalization of journalism and abuse of law by state actors has to end, and we call on multilateral relationships and institutions to ensure that those who attack the media face real consequences for their actions. Otherwise, attacks against the press will continue to escalate, and any standards championed by Canada will remain empty. Within these relationships, Canada must be visible by being connected and committed to international mechanisms, engage in coalitions, fund and acknowledge the benefit of international institutions in upholding press freedom, and be present and vocal in support of their efforts. Canada's leadership as co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition and current chair of the Freedom Online Coalition, as well as the Community of Democracy Working Group on enabling and protecting civil society, are already very positive and welcomed examples of this. At IFEX, our network of over 100 organizations that are based in more than 70 countries actively advocate for freedom of expression and information as a fundamental human right. Many do so in very dangerous circumstances. The targeted repression of press freedom advocates and journalists attacking communities and institutions see accepted norms being undermined and weakened. We've been called on to do more direct support for our members across all regions who find themselves increasingly under attack by authoritarian states focused on shutting down the voices of civil society and threatening dissent at any price. Organizations whose offices and staff are targeted and harassed with no other aim but closure and erasure. They need to be supported, funded, and engaged with, because these are the voices that call for accountability. And if these voices are shuttered, it will leave a vacuum for democracy. We know these issues are complex. IFEX members and allies around the world have been working on them, doing grassroots advocacy, publishing reports, indexes, and offering solution and campaigning for years. They are a rich pool of knowledge that could inform Canada's policies and discussions with nuance and a national and global perspective. As part of your efforts in focusing on media freedom, we would welcome being a conduit to these sources. Governments and civil society groups need to continue to find ways to collaborate, to be at the table together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kay. We now turn to Mr. Clifford, who's for the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. Mr. Clifford, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, honorable ministers, for the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee on international human rights. I am here, as you say, as a representative of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, whose primary focus is the release of political prisoners in Hong Kong, which is quite remarkable because who among us would have thought even 3 years ago that we'd be talking about political prisoners in Hong Kong, once a place that was known as one of the freest places in Asia. But thanks to the national security law, which was imposed on Hong Kong in mid-2020 by the Chinese government, essentially criminalizing any criticism of the Chinese Communist Party or of the Chinese state, we have a situation where most pro-democracy newspapers have been closed, civil society has been destroyed. And I am particularly focused, and I'd like to tell you a story for my 5 minutes, about the Next Digital Media Group, where I was an independent non-executive director. It's a story really of 7 of my former colleagues who are, as we speak, in jail. And they're in jail mostly without trial, let alone conviction. And they're just 7 of the more than 10,000 people who've been arrested on political charges as a result of the anti-government activities of 2019 and 2020 in Hong Kong. I'm a former independent non-executive director of Next Digital, a company that was listed on the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong, that had a market capitalization of about $100 million when it was destroyed in mid-2021 as a result of government action taken under the national security law. And so I think I'd like to give, I think by focusing on my seven former colleagues, that they can stand for the 10,000 plus people in Hong Kong, and really the 7.5 million people who have been oppressed under the national security law. Because their case demonstrates the way in which the Chinese Communist Party and its enablers in Hong Kong government and the private sector are engaging in lawfare, using the veneer of the legal system that underpins well-governed democracies, not for justice or to reach a fair verdict, but in pursuit of a predetermined political end. In this case, the silencing of the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily. So the national security law, as I said, is a broad, all-encompassing law that effectively criminalizes any criticism of the Chinese Communist Party by anyone, anywhere in the world. And in fact, just last week, one of my colleagues in London, Benedict Rogers from Hong Kong Watch, was threatened with jail if he didn't shut down his website, a London-based website run by a British citizen, was deemed criminal by the Hong Kong authorities. So in the case of Next Digital, first the shares of the founder and largest shareholder, Jimmy Lai, were frozen by the Secretary for Security because he said he had reason to believe that Mr. Lai had violated the national security law. There was no court order. Mr. Lai was already in jail. And at the same time, the Secretary for Security froze 3 Singapore-based bank accounts held by Mr. Lai at OCBC and Citibank. I mention this because many people are still under the illusion that Hong Kong is a place that cares about rule of law, property rights, that still has something left of its old days as a rule of law-based, free market-oriented society that would tolerate, even welcome, free press and free discussion. And again, it's important to note that the Secretary for Security provided no evidence to back his claim that Mr. Lai had violated the national security law, nor did he seek a court order, let alone take the case to trial and prove Mr. Lai guilty before a jury. 1 month later, in mid-June 2021, authorities took a further series of action. They sent 550 armed police to our newspaper headquarters. They arrested the chief executive officer, Chung Kim-hung, the editor-in-chief, Ryan Law, and detained other staff. Mr. Chung and Mr. Law have been held without bail since that time, so they also await trial. 4 other former colleagues have been held without bail since the summer of 2021, and I think it's important to say their names because, again, these are individuals. They're 7 among hundreds, thousands of people who are facing political charges in Hong Kong. Chan Pui Man, Young Chin Ki, Feng Wai Kong, and Lam Man Chung. The Secretary for Security then froze the bank accounts of our operating companies. We were unable to accept payments from our nearly 600,000 digital subscribers. And although our employees were afraid, and some of them had notes and computers and documents seized, they continued to put out the newspaper until we were finally forced to close, printing in that last edition a record 1 million copies, which were quickly sold. Starved of cash, we had no choice but to shut the newspaper, and the directors ended up resigning. And yet the government is still pursuing us. There are 4 different investigations, we're told, that are going on against us. The government seems determined to prove that this has nothing to do with freedom of the press, but everything to do with a mismanaged company. So my ask for Canada is not perhaps quite as dramatic or as far-reaching as some of the other panelists, but there are something like 300,000 Canadian passport holders in Hong Kong. I hope that you continue to advocate for them, journalists and non-journalists alike. I hope that given the experience that Canada unfortunately has had with China's hostage-taking approach to diplomacy, I hope that you will put human rights front and center in every conversation that your ambassadors and other diplomats and other officials have with Chinese officials and with Hong Kong officials. And I would also recommend Magnitsky-style sanctions, not only for senior Hong Kong government officials, because they will be taken care of by the Chinese authorities, but for middle-ranking officials, for judges, and also for the enablers in the private sector who have continued to pursue not only former directors of Next Digital, but other people as doing part of the government's dirty work in terms of trying to destroy freedom in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was one of the freest, most remarkable cities in the world, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Clifford. Now we will go to questions. In the interest of time and in the interest of being equitable, I'm going to have to ask all the members to only take up 4 minutes with each round of questions, please. The first question goes to Ms. Vandenbouw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Ms. Abitan, and before I begin, I'd just like to ask you to please pass on our best wishes for a speedy recovery to Professor Kotler. And thank you very much for being here, and particularly for raising the extremely troubling case of DeWitt Isaac. You mentioned that this is really a case study. I mean, he's one of the longest held journalists in detention in the world. Would you have particular lessons that you would draw from his particular case? And how important is it that we as parliamentarians in a hearing like this and in other formats continue to raise his case and other cases like it?
Thank you very much, Ms. Vandenbouw, for that very important question. And I'm very delighted to be here this evening with this distinguished group of parliamentarians, and I will happily relay your kind wishes to Professor Kotler. To be expedient with time, I just want to say that, you know, the fact that Mr. Isaac is the longest, and with his colleagues, the longest detained journalist in the world, is really the emblematic case in terms of media freedom and the global assault on our rules-based international order. Mr. Isaac's case happens to be an extremely egregious case. It is one that is deeply painful. He's been subjected to all sorts of horrific, acts in detention, and he has had absolutely no access to, consular protection. He's had absolutely no access to counsel, to family. He hasn't seen anyone, let alone the light of day, for probably 20 plus years. So how can we make his case the case study for the global assault on media freedom? Is very simple. Canada can play a leadership role. As I mentioned this earlier as one of my recommendations, Canada led the declaration against arbitrary detention, state-to-state relations. So we can take this case and raise it within that context and make it the emblematic case for the discussion on the global assault of media freedom. I hope that answers part of your question.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for your ongoing advocacy. My second question is for Ms. Pulfer. You mentioned in your presentation that Canada should have an evergreen visa program for journalists. Now, recently, when we did our last study a few years ago in this committee on women human rights defenders, we recommended creating an immigration stream for human rights defenders. And since then, the Government of Canada has actually created such a stream. Right now, it's about 250 human rights defenders. I wonder if you could tell us how we could both expand and improve on that particular immigration program.
That's a very good point. Thank you so much for the question. And yes, it is true that there is a 250 visa strong per year program for human rights defenders. Journalists are one of 8 categories that it is intended to serve. It's an excellent introduction to a world in which we have these kinds of designated streams of visas for people at risk. The challenge is the scale of the need for journalists who are fleeing persecution as contrasted to the number of visas available. We were joking earlier today as I was preparing for these comments that we have managed to secure 1.5 visas through that program for our Afghan cohort of journalists who are fleeing persecution at the hands of the Taliban. The half is because we're not entirely sure whether one of the journalists is going to be recommended, but we think so. And the remaining 248.5 spots were justifiably taken up by human rights defenders and their family members who were also escaping, in the majority of this, cases this year, Afghanistan. So what this tells us, working to protect journalists in these kinds of environments and provide them options for safe passage and asylum, is that there's a need, an acute need for an evergreen program of the kind that the Dutch government is currently working to put up. The Dutch government is working on a 50 visa program plus provision for family members. This is something that has been recommended by the Parliament. Canada is currently co-chairing the Media Freedoms Coalition with the government of the Netherlands, and this seems like a real opportunity for Canada to show leadership by breaking out a program of emergency visas specifically for journalists and their families, and also encouraging other member states within the coalition to do the same, considering the acute situation that we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pulfer. We now go to Mr. Viersen.
Mr. Cooper is going to take it.
Yeah.
Mr. Cooper, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my questions to Mr. Clifford. First of all, I share your concern for the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong and agree with you that the government should move forward in expanding Magnitsky sanctions against individuals in Hong Kong that are responsible at a mid-level and are otherwise connected to the dismantling of democracy in Hong Kong. You spoke about the authorities using lawfare to attack journalists and stifle an independent press, primarily using the national security law, but also using other colonial-era laws such as sedition. Could you speak to some of the other tactics that the regime is using, whether it be content removal, blocking websites, economic pressure, physical attacks on journalists, and so on? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, thank you for the excellent question. And the honorable member is clearly very well informed about Hong Kong and the use of sedition laws and other threats. It's a broad-based attack on civil society, and we've seen scores of civil society organizations disband. The legal tactics are the most effective because they tend to focus the mind of the heads of organizations with the threat of prison, the threat of bankruptcy of the organizations. Banks, notably HSBC, have been very active in freezing accounts when asked by the government. But I also think that we have to look at the role of the Hong Kong elite and of the pro-Beijing media. I am among many people who have been attacked by Wenwei Bo, which along with Dagong Bao is one of the two communist dominated newspapers in Hong Kong. And we're seeing a pattern where these media, often quoting mainland Chinese experts, will start attacking an individual or an organization. And if that individual or organization doesn't cease, desist, flee the territory, then the lawfare starts. So it's a broad and remarkably effective, from the communist perspective, attack on civil society organizations, education, obviously the legal system, the media, civil society. For example, anyone who wanted to commemorate the June 4th Tiananmen killings in 1989 was effectively threatened with jail, bankruptcy, or other punishment. I would say the area that honorable members should also be looking at going forward is religion, because religion is one of the last independent institutions in Hong Kong. The Catholic and Protestant churches in particular are a source of education and a source of free thinking. And I think it will be interesting to see if these tactics are extended to them as well. And I thank members for their interest.
Thank you for that. You spoke about the Beijing-based media, but I'd also be curious on your comments on the impact of what has been effectively a takeover of RTHK, which was established in 1928 and was modeled after the BBC and had been a well-respected news source with diverse viewpoints up until very recently.
Another excellent question. If I could clarify the honorable member's comment, the two newspapers I mentioned are actually Hong Kong newspapers. They're either controlled or owned by the Chinese Communist Party. RTHK, as you correctly point out, long had a tradition of independence in its broadcasting, and in the last year or so has seen a political appointee put in who literally erased history by ordering much of the archives to be deleted. So actually Hong Kong's history is being erased, which is, again, a typical communist tactic to control history. One of the SDIR reporters who did a great job reporting was then prosecuted for her reporting. Other staff have been fired or have had their contracts not renewed. So RTHK, which was up there with CBC, BBC, really was an extraordinary news organization, is more like Pravda or Xinhua or the People's Daily now.
Thank you, Mr. Clifford. Monsieur Trudel, vous avez 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. My questions first will be for Ms. Abitan. On the case of Ms. Emizira, which is a symbolic case, there's a particular issue that strikes me as important. These folks that are imprisoned in repressive states, that's the danger of dual citizenship that isn't recognized, isn't it, in some ways? Now, Mr. Isaac hasn't had anyone visit him for over 20 years, apparently. And I imagine, well, has the Eritrean government denied the fact that he has Swedish citizenship? Have they?
Merci de votre question.
Thank you for your question, which is highly relevant and important. I'd like to start by saying this. Undoubtedly, the Eritrean government has denied the Swedish citizenship of Mr. Isaac. So I'd like to elaborate on my answer and say that his dual citizenship has made him a very unique case. He's a European, and Sweden has a particular status and national and international legal obligations in that respect. And as I said earlier in my opening remarks, as indicated in Professor Cutler's report on the consular protection of journalists abroad, diplomatic protection is not discretionary. It's an international binding legal obligation, and it is incumbent on the countries that have imprisoned these journalists and detained these journalists, in this particular case, Eritrea. They must recognize his dual citizenship, his Swedish citizenship, and no longer detain him in an arbitrary fashion. So indeed, there is an illegal obligation on both sides. It's substantive. I could elaborate if I had more time, but well, that's my next question, in fact. What has the Swedish government done over the past 20 years in intervening in this file? What actions has it taken? Response, that's also an excellent question. There have been 5 complaints from Sweden about to open investigation on Mr. Isaac. All of those requests have been denied, and despite the fact that there is already jurisprudence, and that is there are grounds to suppose that crimes against humanity have been committed against this gentleman. So from a legal standpoint, domestically there have been 5 complaints, and diplomatically 9 foreign affairs ministers in Sweden in a row haven't been successful in getting Mr. Isaac freed. And the Swedish parliament has called for an independent commission of inquiry, which is long overdue, to review the government's actions and to get this gentleman freed. And that will take place by the end of the 30th of October 2022. Final questions. If there are so many Swedish foreign ministers in a row that haven't managed to get anything done for Mr. Isaac, how can Canada do anything by intervening? Earlier you said Canada should fight for an end to arbitrary arrests. We're not even involved marginally in this issue, so how could we get involved with the affairs of a sovereign country in this manner? Response. Well, I have previously given a number of recommendations, and I can repeat some of those if you wish, but one thing Canada can do quite quickly is targeted actions in a concerted manner in a multilateral context to condemn Eritrea for these illegal acts. That could be effective, it could be efficient. This movement or these kinds of actions were in fact favoured by a whole slew of NGOs and human rights defenders who have been calling for this kind of action. Third, well, there are a whole lot of recommendations, as I said, but Canada could also support the calls of UN commissioners who are engaged in special human rights procedures, who have called on the urgent and immediate freeing of Mr. Isaac. And Canada is the co-chair of the freedom of expression of the media organisation and committee, and according to it, journalists' safety and security is grounds for this kind of action to be taken. There are many other actions that can be taken, but that's just a couple of ideas for Canada. Thank you very much.
Ms. McPherson, please. You have
Thank you,
4
Mr.
minutes.
Chair. Thank you. And I'll try to be quick. First of all, I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and sharing this testimony with us. It's very, very important to hear from you. And one of the things that I am reflecting on is the fact that all of the stories that you're telling us, and I do recognize that we very clearly have journalists with us, because there is a component of storytelling that I think has seized our imagination. But in my thinking of how we go forward with this, my colleague Mr. Trudel just brought up the fact that there's very little Canada can do sometimes, or there are limits to what Canada can do. And of course, it is always better to be in a situation where we are able to prevent something from happening than condemning it once it has already occurred. And I was thinking a little bit about how we work with our media in Canada and around the world, and the model of how we pay for media, the model of advertising. We have heard in the previous panel, Maria Ressa has talked about how she worked for the International Fund for Public Interest Media, and sort of the way that we can turn that on its head. I'd love to get some information. Perhaps I could start with you, Ms. Pulfer, on how we could fund media, how we could ensure that media was able to continue without that advertising model, which makes Facebook and other social media, makes our journalists so vulnerable.
Great question. Thank you so much for posing it. It gets right at the heart of the key core issue of the financial sustainability of independent news. I've spent quite a lot of time both thinking on this question and working on it with philanthropists and fellow civil society actors, people like Ed Greenspan, people like Kevin Chan of Facebook, trying to figure out what is the best way to ensure that we can create mechanisms through which independent media can be funded. And the best that I have heard, the best that I have come across, is actually an idea that goes back to the Shattered Mirror, looking at the opportunity to set up an entrepreneurship fund for independent media in Canada that would be co-funded by philanthropy, by government, and by individual private donors who care about independent news, and co-managed by a consortium of industry experts, journalists managing funds in the interests of improving journalism. The challenge with all of this, not to put too fine a point on it, is getting journalists to work together so that we can.
It's maybe like politicians in that way.
Perhaps. But essentially, I do see that there's an opportunity. I've spoken with many, many large philanthropists in this country who care deeply about this issue and want to do something material about it. I know that there's interest certainly amongst the Liberal government, but also I think amongst other parties who are seized with the issue of how do we ensure that we can sustain independent media. And also, most definitely, there are individuals and major donors in the general public who want to feed in and support a fund of that kind. So that to my mind is the most logical, sensible, and straightforward way to square that particular circle. Thank you.
And I only have a few seconds left, but I did want to get it on record. I believe it was you, Ms. Kay, that brought up the fact that the Dutch government has put forward legislation on that evergreen visa process for journalists. Is that correct? And if we could just get that on the record one more time, I think that would be helpful.
It was the other Rachel, actually, but
oh, sorry.
So no, that's okay. I'll leave it to her to make that point.
We get that quite a bit. There's two Rachels in this world. It's pretty great, actually. Yes, the Dutch government is working to stand up a program of emergency visas specifically for journalists. They are doing this in consultation with a number of experts, including our Dutch counterpart, Free Press Unlimited, and they're quite a ways along in this process. And it seems like an opportunity for Canada to match what they're doing, or to do something that is uniquely Canadian, but also to show leadership to this coalition of 50 states that we currently co-chair in the Media Freedoms Coalition, that this is something concrete. Yes, there's not always a lot that states can do, but allowing safe access to within their borders is something useful that governments can do in this situation. And so we strongly encourage Canada and other governments in the Media Freedoms Coalition to step up as the Dutch are doing in order to provide these kinds of opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We now go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Zuberi.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses again for being here and for promoting journalism and human rights. I was wondering about the situation, if you guys can please highlight, in the world, do you see any hope when it comes to media, any rising stars, as opposed to what we've heard thus far, the negatives?
It's difficult these days to find some positive stories, but I think it's a fair question. I think definitely one example that I would point to that we've seen at IFEX, that the Media Freedom for West Africa, Media Foundation for West Africa, an IFEX member, has been very involved in work in the Gambia, where the change in government there and a lot of work has been done around issues of media freedom, both at the legislative level, but also in terms of reparations on cases of media freedom violations that had been incurred by the former government and very authoritarian regime that was in place. I think there we've seen how decisions taken by the people to put in place a government that really was working in their favor and working to make that change has been a positive move for sure.
I'd like to, unless others have something burning contribution to make, I'd like to shift focus to Mr. Clifford. With respect to, we heard previously, a previous witness was telling us about, a former journalist in Hong Kong was telling us about red lines that are not clear when it comes to journalism in Hong Kong. Have you been able to identify any red lines that would help us understand what they are, if they at all exist? If they don't, if you can confirm what he said earlier, that would be kind of you.
Thank you for that very provocative and I think incisive question. I'm sorry I did not hear the previous witness, but the red lines are expanding or narrowing depending on one's perspective, but they tend to include Tibet and the Dalai Lama, of course, Taiwan, and any semblance of belief that Taiwan is an independent nation, increasingly Xinjiang and the treatment of the Uyghur Muslim majority there, Hong Kong itself, and the South China Sea. These are what China regards as its core interests. But I think as the Ukraine invasion by Russia has gone on, we're seeing pressure in new areas. So, for example, two or three people get together with a Ukrainian flag and they're arrested because they've violated the social distancing rules, which under the COVID regulations only allow two people to get together. Of course, hundreds of people can line up for a new watch, and that's no problem. So we're seeing an expanding, I think we're seeing a narrowing of the Hong Kong mind and a broadening of these red lines. But I think that your previous witness, if I understood correctly, was quite perceptive in pointing out that the whole point of red lines is they're not really red. They're up to you as the journalist to essentially self-censor and try to outguess the censor. And naturally, in avoiding trouble, people tend to be more cautious and be more and more cautious. So there's effectively no pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong anymore. And the leading English language newspaper, the South China Morning Post, for which I was previously editor-in-chief, I think has become increasingly timid. And that's, takes a huge toll on Hong Kong. And of course, it takes a big toll on the journalists, so many of whom are in jail.
Thanks so much, Mr. Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Clifford. We now go to Mr. Viersen. 3 minutes, Mr. Viersen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Avatar, you were telling us about the case of Mr. Isaac. I'm just wondering a little bit around what's Sweden's response been so far, given the fact that he's a dual national, and is there some way Canada can help Sweden in this regard?
Thank you for your question. So as I responded earlier to one of your colleagues, the Swedish Prosecution Authority, there were 5 complaints that were filed to the Swedish Prosecution Authority on behalf of Mr. Isaac by his Swedish lawyers, all of which were rejected, very sadly. So on the legal front, the complaints that were put forward to the Swedish Prosecution Authority were not open. They were not in agreement to open an investigation to his case, very regrettably. On the diplomatic / Minister of Foreign Affairs side, we understand that 9 foreign ministers over a number of years tried to secure his release and unfortunately were not successful. So Canada, sorry, if you can just repeat your question precisely. So I've explained what the juridical and government contexts have been in Sweden with regards to the case, which have been sadly very disappointing. And I might add quickly that there is an independent commission of inquiry that is being held right now, and the findings are to be rendered on October 31st, 2022, where they will be assessing the government's actions with regards to their efforts in releasing Mr. Isaac. So I hope that provides some kind of context on the domestic front.
Okay, yeah, I'm not quite clear on, you said that this was disappointing. What was disappointing? Is it the actions of the Eritrean government or the actions of the Swedish government?
Both.
Both. Okay.
So, yes, very much both. First, on the Swedish side, very clearly, again, Mr. Isaac's Swedish lawyers tried to have an investigation conducted in the case of Mr. Isaac by the Swedish Prosecution Authority. Again, 5 complaints over the course of 7 years were presented to the Swedish Prosecution Authority, all of which were rejected, appealed, and rejected again. That's the first part. The second part is, again, on the foreign affairs side, 9 foreign ministers were unable to secure his release. On the Eritrean side, as I mentioned earlier as well, Mr. Isaac's lawyers presented a petition for habeas corpus to the Eritrean Supreme Court, was also rejected. And they also presented a complaint before the African Commission, which was a final binding ruling judgment rendered in 2016, which was completely ignored by the Eritrean government. So we have complete rejection and ignoring on the Eritrean side and complete inaction, regrettably, on the Swedish side.
Thank you.
Monsieur Trudel.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you very much. My question will be for Ms. Key, Mr. Clifford, and for Mr. Avital. because Ms. Puffer kind of answered my question previously. Recently, and I'm sure aware of it, there was a report by UNESCO on the whole issue of media financing, and which stated that Google and Facebook receive about half of the advertising spending. And we spoke about this issue last week with other witnesses. That is about the half of digital advertising spending of all corporations globally, and that the share held by newspapers has been halved. And in the same breath, the report stated that there's a lot of misleading information that has circulated, particularly on Twitter, about the pandemic. So, fact number one, underfunding for independent journalism, plenty of funding for social media, and what can we do in light of all of this? Ms. Puffer alluded to a number of potential solutions. Ms. Key, I'd like to hear your input on this, particularly financing of the media outlets.
Madame Key.
Thank you for the question. I would say that I think that it goes back to something that I spoke about earlier, which is really changing the dialogue that's out there and sort of looking at the fact that the media is being put out to be as sort of, fake news or the enemy of the people. I think it's changing the way in which that lexicon is used. And I think that is important, both from the government perspective, I think, to ensure that it is promoting a narrative that is one of press freedom and support for journalism, both in terms of the international and regional institutions that it engages in, but also in the funding that it provides, as Rachel spoke about earlier, in terms of media development. And I think that it's important to do that both at home in terms of the reinforcing the importance of press freedom and respect for journalism, as well as abroad.
Mr. Clifford, sur la même.
Mr. Clifford, on the same topic, please.
Yeah, I think that these are very real issues, and I was struck by Maria Ressa's comment in the previous session about the way the algorithm can be dialed up and down. There clearly is a role for the state to play in terms of regulating social media companies and the kind of that they encourage. Just quickly on the subject of Hong Kong, I would say, and perhaps this is sort of in the good news category that was asked about earlier, we had at Apple Daily almost 600,000 paying subscribers in a city of 7.5 million people. That would be equivalent to 3 million or so people subscribing to one newspaper in Canada. So there are models that can work. On the other hand, our bank accounts were frozen. We weren't allowed to take that money. And now the government wants to put a fake news law in place, which is exactly the opposite of what my other panelists have talked about and what we all need. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Ms. Habitant. There's not much time left, about 30 seconds, but on the same topic, please.
C'est fini?
You're way over.
Am I done?
Our last 3 minutes goes to Ms. McPherson, please.
You're on mute.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to mention that clearly the witnesses have given us so much to think about that we are not very good at keeping track of our time. Mr. Abbottine, could I ask if you had anything that you'd like to answer with my colleague? I certainly wouldn't want to take that opportunity away from you, so I would pass it to you.
I just want to say that I agree with all of my co-panelists. I think they're excellent recommendations, and that we just need to look at ways to perhaps regulate social media in a way that strikes the appropriate balance between non-censoring and ensuring that the proper regulations are in place. So I think the essential aspect here is striking that crucial balance when we regulate.
Thank you. And Ms. Abbottine, since I have you, I guess, a lot of what you had spoken about, a lot of what I know that Erwin Kotler has worked on has been around the suppression of journalists in non-democratic countries, and countries where democracies are not strong, where they're fragile, if in existence at all. And we heard from Mr. Clifford today that, you know, these things are starting to happen. You know, Hong Kong, we would never have imagined that we would be in a situation where media freedom in Hong Kong is for all intents and purposes gone. You know, what do we do? What is our role in protecting journalists when we see the behaviors of democracies acting incorrectly? You know, when we heard last week of journalists being surveilled in Israel. We have seen examples of where journalists have been hung out to dry in different countries that are democracies. How do we deal with that?
I would say one word, and the word is accountability. Accountability is applicable in democratic states as it is in autocratic regimes. So accountability, and through accountability, we reinforce our rule of law, our international legal obligations, our domestic obligations. So accountability is crucial in holding those responsible to account for whatever it is they are committing, whatever human rights violations they are committing.
Mr. Clifford, could I ask you the same question?
Well, I think you do what you panelists are doing so well. I mean, it's not easy. It's a lot of blocking and tackling, as we say in the United States. And I really commend all of you for your interest. I mean, there's no magic bullet. I mean, particularly when we're up against demagogues and people who, you know, we've seen, you know, can swing the other side. So thank you for your work. And I think the kind of work you're doing is exactly what we need more of.
Thank you. And I think that we're at 3 minutes, so maybe I'll just end there, Mr. Chair. That sounds like a very nice, final word to end on.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. McPherson. Thank you very much to the panelists. You have certainly given us a lot to think about and ruminate over. This has been truly exceptional, and we're very, very grateful to you. We also obviously apologize for having gone over time. Insofar as Ms. Pulford, thank you very much. Ms. Kay, thank you. Mr. Clifford and Ms. Abitan. Again, I speak on behalf of every member of this committee when I say please do pass on our regards to Mr. Kotler, and we certainly hope him a speedy recovery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, are we adjourned?
Well, there we go. So there is just the budget. This will take less than 10 seconds, hopefully. I'd like your approval for a budget that was circulated to you on March 16th for this specific study, which was in the amount of $2,675. Do I have everyone's approval? Awesome. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.